Meg Zeller. I'm the PI of the KL2 program. And today's K Club has the great opportunity to have some senior faculty presenting insight around managing and collaborating on multi-centered grants. So our presenters today are Dr. Kenneth Sherman, who is endowed chair as the Robert and Helen Gould Professor of Medicine at UC. He's director of the Division of Digestive Diseases at UC, as well as a professor of internal medicine, as well as Dr. Jeff Whitsett, who is the Kindervelt Professor of Pediatrics at UC, Chief of Division of Neonatology and Pulmonary Biology, and also co-director of the Perinatal Institute. Those are short bio pieces describing these faculty members. There's lots more that they do and lots of wisdom to share. So we are very appreciative of their time today. We are recording so that this can be shared with others in the future. So thank you for agreeing to that. And I think you both could take it from here as you have it set up. Thank you.
Okay, and how do you want to do it? I had a few slides.
Oh, great. Yeah, I made an outline of some topic areas, but if you want to start with your slides, that would be great.
We'll go through that quickly and I'd be glad to entertain any questions. I assume all of you folks are in a KL2 or KL3-like program through the CTST here, CCST.
This is, so you can assume that for sure, but there also could be people who are interested in writing multi-centered grants who would have gotten this announcement. So targeting early career faculty, but could be more than that.
But it's early career.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. If you could bring up my slides, that'd be great. So I've been at Children's for 46 years now, and frankly, have a lot of positive things to say about building multi-centered and multi-divisional programs. My first grant in 1978, and I was a junior investigator along a major program project on diabetes and pregnancy. And that allowed me to see what a program project was, how it was put together, what the administration, how we would meet regularly. And it really got my a basic knowledge of the opportunities within a program like that. But probably the biggest event for me was in the 1980s when we developed the Center for Excellence in Molecular Biology, Heart and Lung. It was a major multi-center program project, 7 years. And it integrated UC with the Broad at MIT, with Dallas Southwest, and UCSF during a period of the explosion of molecular biology. And so being a part of that, seeing how it was organized, allowed a rich involvement in new technologies, in interacting regularly with really fantastic scientists. And it also brought some national and international visibility to do both our program here at UC as well as to my own program. So there were really great merits of being involved in those. And since that time, I've been continuously funded by R01s. Almost always we've had at least one or two P30 type grants. And presently we have 2 U01s and a T32, which are all multi-divisional and institutional. So it really brings synergy and ability to do things and interact with scientists in a way that's really, really synergistic. Next slide, please. So why do this? And I think the bottom red thing is to beware of what you wish for. And so make sure the work that you're going to be involved in, if it seems attractive and collaborative, make sure it's of primary interest to your career and what you want to accomplish with your life and your career. Don't just do it for the money. It's easy. Oh, you look great. You got a grant. Now you can keep your job. That's terrific. But if you're really building your own career, make sure you love what you're doing and it's really synthetic with what you want to accomplish. So the opportunities to bring diverse synergistic talents, both intellectual talents as well as technological. You may have cohorts of cohorts that you couldn't amass at your own institution. And this gives you an opportunity to develop unique clinical cohorts. Sharing technologies, each center may have a contribution of distinct technologies that coming together gives you a real advantage in grantsmanship and then in being able to accomplish your science. This creates synergies, enhancing the quality of your grant application, and it really enhances recognition of your own institution, your department, and in the end, your own career by being able to work in those collaborative environments. Next slide. So, how do you begin to think about it? At your stage, it'd be great to be involved and understand with the infrastructures around you and to participate in those as junior investigators. In our UO1s, we have Jumpstart Awards where you could apply for your own aspect, your own program within a larger center. And there are Young Investigator Awards along many program projects that gives you a chance to test the waters. Early planning, look for opportunities as a PI as you begin to see what kind of a program could I put together. Make sure you understand your own abilities and you have built a staff around you that has all the synergistic qualities that would allow you to compete nationally for these kinds of awards. Most importantly is know your NIH. They are your friend, not your enemy. Know your program officers. Follow their websites. Look for funding opportunity announcement, FOAs. Those are areas of interest to the NIH that they say they're going to put money into it. It's not guaranteed money, but it really suggests that they have an interest and they may have a special study section that would review your grant. An RFA, these are research funding announcements, and there's a pocket of money has been given directly to accomplish something. So our lung map grant, a UO1 presently is an RFA. They said, we're going to put $7 million into a program that will be multi-institutional to accomplish a single cell atlas of the lung. And so we're aware of that, and it's guaranteed money if you can compete for it, but all these are competitive awards. So understand those and anticipate them by knowing your program officers, and that's really a collaboration. I knew all the program officers in the NHLBI who would be involved in my grants. And it was very, very helpful to understand what their priorities were, what their accountabilities were, and how you might meet their requirements. That communication helps you anticipate. Generally, I think it's 2 or 3 years, maybe 3, in beginning to plan for a major program project. Getting the synergies, getting themes, getting specific aims and hypotheses that are cohesive, and show the ability of your coworkers to work together. Co-publications, really important, showing not that just you like each other and share coffee, but you actually are working closely together as you build your teams. So early planning, who's going to lead this thing? And you really have to select which institution is going to be the lead administratively, and really who's going to lead the melding of the group. And that comes through touchy-feely stuff, knowing your co-investigators for a long period of time, trusting them, and building that team that you think would really come together and allow you to accomplish something. Make sure you understand the scientific mission. It isn't all about me, it's about the whole team's accomplishment, which is very different sometimes than an R01. And then recognize that there are huge institutional barriers. And I've been blessed with really fantastic research administration for my whole career, both at UC and over here at CCHMC. They understand how to develop subcontracts, the complexity of getting through all the barriers of hiring for your own program once you are successful, meeting all your HR requirements, and all your budgeting structures and subcontracts have to be in place when you put that grant together. Along with early planning, communication is really important. In the day of COVID, it's quite challenging to do it all by by Zoom. Body language isn't always so clear, and having personal meetings, and that takes a lot of time and energy. So we have a coordinating committee, a DCC, that puts together all of our communication, make sure that we can agree on timings of meetings, and that we can make personal interactions as often as possible, because that team effort becomes really, really important for these kinds of programs. Many of them last for many years. Ours has been in place now for the present UO1 for the last 7 years. It's fantastic. Next slide. So choose your partners wisely, know your co-investigators, talk way ahead of time in planning who will do what's the division of budget, what's the division of labor. Identify a leader with skills in collaborative leadership, really important. Achieve a clear consensus of your goals. The roles of each investigator might be very similar, each contributing equally, or in many times there'll be specific aspects that one investigator will be responsible for. Organize recurrent face-to-face meetings, allocate the budget for administration. We tend to cost out patients and technologies and those kind of animal costs, et cetera. But the administrative costs become really quite considerable. Someone has to manage budget, communication, recruiting, all those kinds of things. And when you put all that together, make sure you understand what the goal of the funding body. If it's pharma, they're going to define pretty much what that grant looks like and what the structures will be, and make sure that your institution can live within those, both from liability point of view. Once you get the lawyers involved, it can be a nightmare, as well as data, who owns it and who's responsible for disseminating that data, and under what, under whose name and what institutions. All this should be done a priori so that you don't get into conflicts wherever possible. Next slide. So budgets become a real problem. Make sure legal agreements between hospitals, between institutions, between pharma, between NIH are all in place and manageable. The legal agreements can be very, very complicated. Just getting hospital records from across the street might take you a year or two. The NIH pre-planning for most clinical studies requires all these hoops to be met, approved by your institutional review boards, and the patient recruitment and accrual is pretty much got to be guaranteed, because many clinical studies funded actually never get started because of the legal and institutional complications. So the NIH is much more proactive in making sure you got all your I's dotted before you begin the grant. Again, create a team mentality and understand who has ownership of publications. That can get very complicated as well, but should rely on the standard requirements for what constitutes a real authorship contribution. Everyone should agree with that, not just that I'm a nice guy and I come to your meetings, but I'm actually contributing scientifically to that work. That needs to be agreed on, and then attempting to be as inclusive as possible wherever possible when you have those opportunities to bring others into that process of writing or completing the work. Next slide. So just give you a quick run through how I built our UO1 that's presently in place. First was make sure our own center was on strong footing, that we had all of the components of access to clinical samples, the technologies, and the faculty's expertise that would allow us to compete successfully within a UO1 grant. We brought new technologies to it. We had to show that, and that required working throughout our institution with other departments, immunobiology, developmental biology, bioinformatics, pathology, et cetera. And we brought unique technological capabilities to that. Next slide. once we had all that in place in our own house, I had close arrangements with other strong investigator-led programs at the University of Pennsylvania, at Boston, the Broad, University of California, Santa Cruz, University of California, San Diego, Rochester, and Pacific Northwest National Laboratories. So I contacted them. We saw that we had synergistic opportunities and that we could probably compete successfully by showing that previous publications together, areas of expertise that would be synergistic, and the ability to work, trust each other and to work closely. So it's very easy to pull us together because we had long histories with these institutions and with the leaders of each of those programs. So that brought us together in quite successfully. Next slide, it just shows to end up, each of us brought unique capabilities. The center is led by Sarah Lynn, who's a program officer at the NIH. She runs herd on us. She has expectations, and we have accountabilities that are agreed upon, shared, and we meet regularly to do that. And we bring unique capabilities to a very complex program. So that's what I wanted to just start off the conversations with.
That's great, Jeff. So I didn't make any slides. I did put together an outline, and I will say that I'm the junior investigator between me and Jeff. I've only been federally funded for 33 years or something like that. So with a variety of types of grants. And I agree with everything that Jeff just said, but I'd like to make some specific comments and start to get a little bit more granular in thinking about this, because I do think multi-center collaborations do start when you are applying for your first grants, be they pilot grants or even Ks. And many of you may not be aware that even interactions between UC investigators and Children's Hospital investigators require development of subawards and collaborative agreements. We are not one institution, even though, Children's Hospital is UC's Department of Pediatrics. They are a separate institution for most grants, and therefore, you actually have to jump into this pretty early if you're thinking about crossing over in either direction and using cores or working with other people. So, what I'm going to say applies to Ks, to our O3s, our 21s, our O1s, as well as the bigger P awards and U awards. You need to find collaborators, and the assumption I'm making is that most of you are fairly early in your career. And so how do you find collaborators? Where do you go for that? And the answer is it may either be through introductions of people more senior who are mentoring you, people who are already established experts in your field, and you're going to approach them blindly sometimes and ask for their help and support in what you're doing. And you need to, when you make those approaches, be aware of, why do I need this person? Sometimes it is going to be for specific techniques or abilities. Sometimes it's going to be because they are an established leader in the field and you want to jump on their bandwagon, which will help you with your grant. sometimes it's a collaboration, in various fields. You hear the term the mafia in that field. In digestive diseases, there is an IBD mafia. I was just told, and I was in San Francisco or San Diego last week, and someone said, introduce me as part of the hepatitis mafia. And that group is important because being involved with that group gives you an inside track into hearing about opportunities or being included potentially in multi-center opportunities. So you need to find out who are the existing players. In addition, the very term mafia refers to keeping others out, and you need to be able to get to the inside of such a group so that they accept you as one of their own, because they're probably members of that group are going to be reviewers. And if you're not part of the group, if they don't know you, you'd like to think that your science is always the trumps all, but I don't think that's true, right? I think that the politics is always a part of ultimate funding decisions, and you're either in or out, and that takes some work and some effort. So that means sometimes going to meetings and schmoozing, and as good as Zoom is, you need to be seen in person. So early in a career, I encourage people I mentor to get out and be visible as much as they can be. When you start talking to people, you need to be clear in what you need and what your expectations are. And sometimes it's relatively narrow. You need help with a specific technique or a test that you can't bring on board, or you don't have the availability of that equipment. And that needs to be identified well in advance. Dr. Whitsett mentioned showing that you have collaborative ability with that group, but what does that mean? And I will tell you that that's a conscious process that I'll give an example. Some of these are just anecdotal examples, but 3 years ago, I began talking to an investigator at University of Nebraska about working in the alcohol arena. Alcohol is a really closed group. It's very hard to break into funding in NIAAA. And the first thing that we began talking about was, how can we begin to be visible together? And that included writing review articles. So we started with writing a review article. We came up with several areas where we could share samples to develop some collaborations between us. And we are now in the process of generating data that is going to lead to some abstracts and meetings, and eventually our first paper, which will be the preliminary data for the grant that we have actually now been planning for 2.5 years. That's the timeline. That's the process of doing this. And in that time, we've been putting together our interactions with each other, as well as searching for a couple of very specific cohorts to work with. And we identified a national, multinational cohort called an Urban Arch that collects samples from patients with alcohol and drug abuse from a number of places around the country and around the world. And that's going to be the cohort. We've gotten them to agree to be part of our group and provide the key samples that we're going to need. Again, the point is, you don't decide to do this 1 or 2 months before you submit the grant. This could be an extended multi-year process to get to the point of submitting something that may in itself take at least a couple of cycles to get funded, because most things don't get funded on the first cycle. So, you know, the takeaway message, think long. Jeff talked about engaging program officers. I think in an early stage of your career, it is really, really important to get to know one or more program officers in one or more institutes relevant to your work. So I have program officers in NIAID and NIDDK, and less so in NIDA and AAA. And I work hard to interact with those people. I contact them frequently. I make the effort to meet them at meetings and conferences. I find out if they're going to be at the big national conference, and I ask to meet with them there and sit down for lunch and get to know them as people, because they will be the ones who will think of you and turn around and say, we have an RFA coming out. Here's what it's going to take to be responsive to that RFA. When you get a score, sometimes you get a great score and it's going to get funded. But a lot of times scores end up someplace in that gray area near a fund line. And that's the point where it's your program officer that goes before council and represents you and says, this investigator and their work is someone that should be supported. And that often makes the difference in, do you get funded or not get funded on that particular project? So again, know your program officer. Those are relationships that in many of the institutes, these people are stable for decades, and you get to know them and you'll work with them and they'll take care of you. So I would say those are some of the key early points. We did get a few specific questions. I'm going to try and briefly address those, and then I think we should open it up to the group. One was, how do you identify collaborators and feel confident they'll fulfill your duties of research? I think that goes back to doing some things with them before you put their name on your grant. You'll feel confident when they perform with you in a collaborative manner. And if they don't, then you sort of have your answer. If you can't get the data and the information you need, if you ask them on a preliminary pilot grant to send you a method and you're still begging for it 12 hours before it's due, that's probably going to be a problematic collaborator, and you should be thinking about that up front. How do you manage the budget on a multi-center grant? You know, on the smaller grants, dollars are very limited, and it's important to understand that in the sub, if you're the lead institution, their overhead is counted as part of your dollars. So you need to really think about budget, and often it's the grant that limits what they can do. And you might be saying to them, here's what I need done, but I can only afford X. We can give $75,000 to your institution per year for the next 2 years on an R21. What can you do with that? And then you have to ask yourself, is that enough for fulfilling the goals of your grant and meeting your needs relative to your hypothesis? And if not, you're going to need to change what you do, because grants are limited. And if you get too expensive, things get really complicated quickly. So again, quick anecdotal story. I just submitted a U grant 2 institution investigator initiated, well, 3 institution because it includes children's, and University of Maryland. The budget for this is $1 million a year. We exceeded the $500,000 cap. That meant that 2 months before the grant was due, I had to submit largely the entire grant to the NIH for permission to submit and go over the $500,000 budget. Then I had to write and finish the entire grant, and I actually didn't receive my formal notification that will be permitted by the NIH to submit that until 4 days before the actual grant deadline. So again, you need to be aware of your timelines and what you need to do on a particular grant. You have to work with that other institution. That meant I had to do that 4 months before to get in place all of the budget pieces relevant to what it would cost to, what was the participant cost. You can't assume that what your participant costs are, especially for human research, is the same in another institution. Everyone has their own costs in getting the bread and butter things done. A CBC for us is $5, and for them maybe $11. Does that matter? Yeah. When you have to get 20 of those in 50 patients, that adds up quickly. So you need to, again, focus on your planning and your budgets, and you need to be as granular as you can be in that budget process. But at the end of the day, your budget with your collaborating institution is what you've decided you can afford to do, not whatever they ask for. And if they can't do it, then again, that's part of your plan, or you need a different plan. Do PIs discuss strategies for allocating salaries? Sure they do. It's a negotiation. You say to them, I can give you half of a lab tech for this. And they say, I can't do that work without 75%. You go back and look at your budget and say, can I give them 75%? And the answer will be yes or no. Again, you might need to modify your science or your expectations. So it's a constant back and forth with the people that you're going to be working with. I think that addresses the questions we were sent, but in the remaining time, I think we should open it up to questions from the group.
Ken just talked you out of doing a program project grant because of the administrative challenges. He pointed all of them accurately, and they're all surmountable. You just have to plan ahead and be aware of your timeline. Choose your partners well, just like marriage, really important to choose your partner well. And work towards being agreeable, inclusive wherever you can be. But in the end, it's really quite valuable. It allows you to bring talent to your question. Young investigators can be supported by these kinds of programs. They become leaders in the future. I've been able to watch from each of those program projects, those young investigators within those all became leaders in their field. They became, in Ken's terms, the mafia. We like to call it the dream team rather than the mafia. But there are cohorts that you go, you're going to meet people in these early days, and you're going to be a cohort, and you're going to mature with your career with them. And once you have trusted relationships, it really becomes a lovely environment, academic environment to participate in these programs.
To add to that, there are many large consortium groups. I've been involved with the NIAID AIDS Clinical Trials Group for the last 25 years. And they offer opportunities for young investigators to get involved There's 38 international, national institutions involved with that group, and it gives you opportunities to get involved with design of multi-center trials. And there are special considerations for young investigators and opportunities for pilot funding as well, that then do help you grow with a cohort of similar investigators and become leaders of multi-center trials that may be a 5 to 8 year process of getting to that point. But eventually, some of the people that were fellows when I started and I helped early on mentor are now the directors of their institutions and leaders nationally in that group. So, you can watch people grow up as you go through it, or you can be part of that growth and emerge as a leader in the group.
I think you're both speaking to ways for early career folks to get involved. How do they find those opportunities? Are there program announcements that are affiliated? Like, I know how I got involved in a multi-site. I was part of a consortium, and it allowed me to write R01s as ancillary studies off of that consortium, which really solidified my career with the NIDDK in a way that I had no idea as I started out. So, but that was like a designated ancillary study mechanism off of a consortium. So are those what you're referring to, so people know what to look for?
A lot of times I think you can get referred to these things by other more senior investigators in the field of interest, which is why it's so important to be visible and engage people in your field. In the ACTG, when I was chairing the hepatitis study group within the ACTG, every year we have a time when we have a committee and we try to bring in young investigators, and we encourage all of the more senior people to nominate young investigators who can join the committee. And we reach out to those people and say, can I sponsor you? So I think other groups have similar mechanisms, and you have to know who's out there, who's interested. But over the years, I've met people who have approached me and said they're interested in the field, and I try to keep in touch with those people, and then throw out their names and say, would you like to join the group and get in on the ground floor?
As we plan for programmatic grants, we have recurrent weekly or bi-weekly meetings that are cross-divisional, and they're open. There are major presenters. If we have a PO1 that's going to have 3 or 4 main themes, independent like R01s, during that meeting, we're inviting young investigators to collaborate within those, and they get a sense of the community, of the opportunities, both locally, and once those grants are accepted, those become linked nationally. Really offers a fantastic opportunity for young people to get engaged. The other is this is where I recruit. So I'm stalking at all times to build my own faculty. So many of the young faculty that I noticed from Penn and from the Broad and from Stanford came from my recognition of them when they were junior investigators presenting their posters within our U01 annual meetings. And I began to meet with them, understand their science, follow them, stalk them. And many of my faculty have come from that interaction. And they're still with me, honest. So get engaged, yeah. Come to meetings. Sometimes it's better to be in the lab and squirting or looking at your data, but other times it's really important to get engaged with the people around you. People will look out for you and care about your careers too.
Yeah, I think people are very receptive in general at this more senior level to welcome young investigators. You want to see your field perpetuate and grow.
Yeah, yeah.
And therefore, you want that next generation to come in. At some point, we realize we can't solve everything.
I also, again, my experience with NIDDK and a consortium is that the program officers really are encouraging us as investigators to do exactly what you're describing. So it isn't, we have investigators who want to mentor and want to bring people in to the fold, but what my impression has been is that the NIDDK in this case is expecting that we are developing early career faculty, and we are looking for people to identify, to submit other grants, and to write Ks that might be a spinoff of what we're doing. So it's not just the goodness of our heart and interest in mentoring, it's that the institutes are expecting us to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
We have a hand raised. Please feel free to jump in, folks, if you have a question. You don't need to raise your hand. It's okay.
Yes, good afternoon. This is, my name is Uicho Dagwa. I recently joined the Department of Neurological Surgery here from UT Southwestern. So I'm about 4 years into my practice as a surgeon, and then recently 4 months into my practice here at UC. One of the biggest challenges I've found as a surgeon is coordinating time to meet with investigators, with potential mentors. And we have all these wonderful ideas. We put specific aims pages together, and I'm on call, or there's something that comes up. How would you advise surgeons who are interested in really developing a career as surgeon scientist? How would you advise us to sort of foster those collaborative relationships in lieu of despite some of the limitations that we have time-wise?
That's a real
That's a tough
challenge.
one. I start by making sure that your chair gives you a little bit of time for protection that you could devote to building that and having those activities. Even a half day a week creates a window of time for you that's non-clinical, for you to focus on those things, which includes meetings and conference calls and things like that. And, either if your section head isn't doing that for you, then you may need support at the chair level.
Yeah, both protected time as well as support for people who would work with you, whether it's in data collection, sample collection, organization, or even science. So in our fetal care center, our surgeons have several co-workers who lead most of the investigational work. And that protected time and support is really required for surgical subspecialties where there's so much clinical activity required. In the usual K, requirement is 75 to 80% protected time. That's easily eroded. And one of my mottos when I was young and promising was just say no. You have a limited amount of time, and you're going to have to be very cognizant of how you use that to get your career going. And you can't do everything. So some things you strategically will accept, but make sure you protect the time both for your intellect as well as getting your work accomplished. They say 70%, but then you have 10 clinical meetings to go to. And why aren't you there? Or why didn't you go to Mercy Anderson to talk to the nurses about how to resuscitate babies? Someone needs to do it, but not if I have 80% protected time on my K award. So you have to be tough and protect your time to make sure that you can accomplish your goals, but be a good citizen too. So you're walking a tightrope.
Right. And, part of the goal of having a mentorship committee is if you feel that that's not happening, you have support of a group to go to your leadership and require that they provide what you are due.
And part of that too is negotiating when you get your next job, and being very careful and clear about the negotiated time and the expectations that they have for your job.
Hi, this is Moises. This was a great discussion. I had a question. I'm starting to collaborate and put together some grants with investigators who are based internationally. So could you speak into that if any of you have experience setting up collaborative projects with international sites investigators, and any advice on that matter will be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you want to take it?
Well, I can start it. So the answer is yes, it is difficult and challenging at a variety of levels. The NIH has some specific rules related to international collaborations, and depending on what country you're going to, you need to be concerned about potentially issues of technology transfer and the equipment that's going to be used as part of your project or anything you're going to provide there. So you do need to know there's always a political overlay to doing work in certain areas and countries. Right now, it would be very difficult to be doing a project in Russia because that is not a comfortable place to be doing that at this moment. The separate from that are dealing with the international rules, again, depending on the type of project you're doing. I'm running an international vaccine trial through the ACTG, and we have been open for a year and a half at US sites, and we actually just had a couple of international sites come on board. It's taken them a year and a half to deal with a variety of both IRB and US federal regulations to be compliant with what's required on an NIH funded trial. And a couple of countries, we ran into issues of importation. So, for example, in Vietnam, we were not able to import our vaccine investigational product at all. That we were unable to provide what their country required for us to even bring it in to do a study. And we tried for over 2 years to do that. So yes, international poses some very specific issues. In terms of working and collaborating with people, again, depending on the countries, you may have trouble getting back and forth, both yourself or bringing investigators. If you're trying to move investigators or junior investigators back and forth on visas like J1s, that sometimes is challenging as well. Again, shipment of materials across borders in both directions. You may collect samples in another country and find that they can't be legally imported easily to the US without quarantine restrictions. I was recently asked to destroy a number of samples that we obtained from Egypt because polio is still present in Egypt, and there was a worry that there could be polio from those samples. And so luckily the primary project was done, but if that hadn't been done, we were asked to provide the NIH with evidence of destruction of those samples within 2 weeks of getting the notice of need for destruction. So those are unique types of challenges that exist with international studies. Did you have specific questions that, other than those broad areas, that you're concerned about or have run into?
Yeah, no, I think that general advice is very useful. I work in an area, I specifically work in tuberculosis, which takes me to look at international collaboration and sites. So that was very helpful, Ken. Thank you.
The NIH has some criteria that if it can be done by a laboratory in the United States, that they will not fund R01 type applications from foreign in general, unless you get absolved from that stipulation. There are good international consortia that are easy to work with as subcontracts. CZI, the Zuckerberg initiative for single cell omics. I work with a TBX4 consortium. There are advocacy programs for specific diseases within both the United States and in Europe that we're actively able to, as subcontracts, achieve some synergies, but it's really challenging at the NIH. If it can be done in the NIH, they'll give you a low score. You can put it in there, but it's really hard to get funded if you say you're dependent on labs outside the United States.
Thank you so much.
Are there additional questions from the group? Anyone out there?
I wish you all luck. Vote early and vote often. It's how you get grants. So you work at it, you try. My first grant got an abysmal score. In those days, we had pink sheets and they sent them to you in the mail and it said, your grant was approved, and I was ecstatic. And at the bottom said, but not funded. And they told me all of the things that I didn't do right. That was in 1979, something like that. I learned really quickly, and I put that in my front drawer every time I came to work, and opened my desk drawer, there was that pink sheet. And so after that, I took consideration. I vote early and often, and I haven't lost very many grants since then.
Well, we appreciate—
Embrace the fun.
Yeah. We appreciate both of you presenting today and sharing your wisdom. And again, thank you for the recording of this as well. Wishing everyone a good day, and thanks for your time.